That person would do the same thing. And that person would do the same thing. So you can see how difficult it would be. And by the way, they didn't have bank accounts. They didn't have driver's license. Most of them had, none of them had passports. There was no identifying information. It was almost impossible to try to track these people down. It's brilliant in its simplicity, and it kept Osama bin Laden alive for 10 years. He was very, very careful. So finally, then the last courier, somebody they trusted implicitly, was the person that would take the information, even though the courier didn't know who he was, would take that information, hold it for a certain number of days or hours or sometimes weeks or months, then deliver it personally to Osama bin Laden's compound. And and over time, they just got little pieces of snippets of information that got a little closer and a little closer, and they had a real big break at one point. So one piece of information had a family member mentioning to another family member that he had disappeared for a while, and they asked where he was, and he said, "I am with the old ones now." Doesn't sound like much, does it? Right? I mean, how many of us have had that conversation? Love you, Dad. It's a pretty difficult thing to measure up. But some brilliant analyst took that little piece of information and started laying it over all the other things that we knew and said, interesting. I think this may be the guy that they talked about 5 years ago. Amazing. Think about that. You know how much time and effort and knowledge and disappointment along the way. And they figured that out, and by happenstance, somebody stumbled into this particular person. I say, I always used to argue that the best part of being an investigator is luck, but you have to be really prepared to know when luck is at your door. And that's exactly what happened. And they were in the right area and said, I think we found the person that was that person they talked about 5 years ago. So they watched this person for a little while, and this person ends up showing up at that compound back last August. And so they started trying to understand, as you might understand, like any criminal investigation, if you want to understand what this place is and who's there and all of those things. Everything about the place checks out fine, other than it has some unusual characteristics. The security walls were much higher than any place else in the neighborhood. It's a pretty safe area in Pakistan. The barbed wire was, in the FBI, we would say, a clue. And the fact that the balcony of this place, this was one thing that struck me when I first saw the compound back in January. The balcony, which is designed to take, and it's a kind of an attractive area, it's a lot of agriculture, it's kind of a pretty view, if you will, had a wall built up, a 7-foot wall built at the front of the balcony, so there's no view from the balcony. It's kind of an odd feature for a place that was, by standards, larger. I mean, it wasn't, I heard some people describe it as a mansion. I don't know, you've seen the pictures afterward. I would never describe it as a mansion. But it was bigger by compound standards than most of the other compounds in the area. So it was expensive to build. So all of those clues led them to believe, all right, we don't know who it is, but it's got to be somebody important, and it's got to be somebody they're protecting. And this is something else smart that they did, I thought. They would allow the neighborhood kids to come in. So the owners of the compound lived there. And had a cover story. Right? They had a story that they were business people in the tribal areas, and the reason they had extra security was because they were afraid that they had made some enemies in the tribal areas. And in Pakistan, that is about the best cover story you can have, because that is an easy thing to do. And so they said, we're just protecting our family, no big deal. And by the way, have the kids come in and they can play in the compound. They were very smart, but they built a compound that had a separate compound in it. So they would come in and see the family and play with the kids and go out and tell their parents, seemed like a normal family to me. They seemed nice, right? And they never got to see Osama bin Laden or his family. They never really came in. They were in house arrest. I mean, this would be the worst house arrest you've ever seen in a pretty small area, relatively, in this particular compound. So from that, they just kept doing their homework and doing their homework. And they used every one of our intelligence services really contributed to this in some small way. The satellite folks were taking pictures of it, right, as you might see, and what you saw on TV from Google Earth, trying to figure out what it is and what is the pattern of life in this particular place. They were able to at least see that somebody, and has it been reported in the news, that somebody was walking in the compound that was a rather tall male, and he was tall. For an Arab male, he was about 6'3" or something like that. So he was pretty tall. So that was kind of an interesting thing. Now, they couldn't identify him particularly well, but something didn't fit right because that particular person was not the people who were living in the house. So things started to come together. They were put other pieces of information. You imagine how hard this all is, right? And at some point, anybody sitting around the table, me included, came to the conclusion, because it just got better and better and better, that it had to be Osama bin Laden. Because of the people that were, the limited number of folks who were there, the people who they met after they left, all of those things, you started thinking, it's got to be him, absolutely. So what started out at about 30%, and there was a particular analyst there who I thought she was just brilliant, who was convinced early on, and she made her case early on. And it was interesting, the case that she made in January and the case when everyone decided, yeah, this is right, was just spot on. I mean, she was just spot on. She was just right there. So by that point, everybody had at least, everybody's conclusion was about 80% chance that it was absolutely Osama bin Laden. So I know the military guys got a lot of credit, and they deserve credit for what they did. It was a pretty hard mission. We forget that those special forces units do about 2 of those a night in Iraq and Afghanistan. They go to compounds every night. That's why their tours are so short. They'll go in for only 6 months or so, and we pull them out, because they're doing combat every night. It's really, these are amazing people, amazing people. And of course, I'm supposed to, at this point, show for whatever you think happened that day, I'm supposed to show for my Army people. Army has special forces units too. Do this every night. All right. There, I've done my, as we say, green shooter job. And so they got the operation. You can imagine in the stories that came out of the fact when they were supposed to train, they didn't tell these guys what they were doing. They just pulled them out, said, here's a compound, you're going to raid this particular compound, we think it looks like this, train on this compound as much as you can. The day that they came back and said, all right, looks like we're going to go on this thing, and by the way, you're going to go get Osama bin Laden. Can you imagine that conversation? That's a powerful thing. Of course, these guys are tough. This is the assignment of a lifetime for them. They've been licking their chops for this because they've lost friends and family. And they had as much at stake in this operation as anybody. And there wasn't, oh my gosh, I might not come home. Apparently, there were nothing but cheers coming from this group, like finally, and we're ready to go. And of course, when you have a well-trained special forces unit, you saw what can happen. And that is a pretty tough mission to pull off. And I will tell you, as been reported, it didn't go all that well up front. And as they'll also tell you, no mission they plan ever goes the way you plan it. The first thing that goes out the door is the plan that you had. And they said, sure enough, when they got there, the first thing that went out the door is the plan that they had. It was a little problem. Maybe you've seen the helicopter crash and other things. And the pilot, by the way, was brilliant for what he was able to accomplish in that particular thing. Nobody got hurt. And a successful mission, when the bad guy is dead and every single good guy comes home to their family, that is a successful mission.